Forward to the cloud. All right, everyone, we're back on. So give me 1 second. Now my computer's acting up there. Okay, so what we were discussing about positive punishment is when you add something, so extra work within the classroom, which is common practice. So sometimes kids will have to pick up trash on the floor or clean a lot of the desk with some wipes or things like that, or detention. We're always documenting these. We're always understanding how many times this is happening, and we're talking with the parents about this as well. The thing is, we never want to start out with a long or kind of adding so many things that it doesn't really fit with what the kiddo did. So always want to think about starting with something small, and always try to match it to the time or the concept or the behavior that they did, because we never want it to be extreme. So if a kid maybe kept talking out of turn multiple times after being reminded, but then you make them lose all their recesses for the week, which might not be a good thing for a kid who's learning those social skills. So really think through some of those positive punishment practices if you are going to use them. So I like this from Vanderbilt. Again, as part of this process, I found some really great resources here. I like that this comment form, I hope you can share this with other colleagues and really think through some of these events. So here she's showing, the teacher showing the planets, and then the student makes this comment about they're gassy giants out there. And so the teacher, verbally scolds the kiddo. And so again, hopefully that will decrease the behavior from happening again. So adding something there. And again, it's always the teacher with those eyes that are so glaring or whatnot. So again, for me, when I work with kids, I tend to try to watch my facial features, because that's, again, adding something more than already the comment that you're letting them know about the behavior. When we have negative punishment, a lot of you have already done many of these in your practice or experienced these growing up. We have removal of privileges. If you have a point system, loss of points. A preferred choice is limited. So instead of choosing between that playground equipment and this playground equipment, they only get to choose, or you have 3 options. They only get to choose 2. So however you decide to kind of limit that, again, item might be taken away for a short period of time as well. When we remove privileges, you must think through the specified time frame. It can't just be an arbitrary time limit. So you have to have already thought these things through. Kids need to be aware of it. Again, it can't be extreme, because then it becomes a more of a punitive practice that, and also maybe cause kids some anxiety about, is it going to be a period, or is it going to be a whole week? So again, the consistency across all students is really important. And then for younger children, again, their brains are still thinking about what time is. They don't really have a big concept about that. So you might use shorter time frames for younger kids, and older kids, it might look a little longer for them when you remove privileges or items. And again, not for an extreme amount of time. So here's an example from Vanderbilt. So negative punishment. So same concept. I love that they have it this way. Kid makes that comment, and now the teacher says you've lost 5 minutes of free time. Again, the eyes there are so glaring. I always kind of laugh at that. But then the next time he wouldn't engage in that behavior. So it's decreased based on that removal of privileges. One way to also structure, you might have a shorter version of a point system within your therapy sessions. Definitely more classes that are focused on emotional disturbance or special education class may have this, where you are actually giving points out for kids' positive behaviors. As you see up here, if you're teaching some sports or outside on the playground, they're following activity rules. Per each interval, you're giving 50 points, a lot of attention. So you see the kids are answering some questions, you might give 10 points out. The big one here I like is number 9, is when you can work with kids to ignore behaviors that are, like the kids' comment of gassy behaviors. A lot of times kids will laugh at that, but if you see a kid who's able to refrain from that, you would want to give them points or praise them as well, that reinforcer. When we get to negative categories, as you can see toward the bottom here, these are some of the noxious behaviors, not going to be over the top, not going to hurt people. They would simply lose a certain amount of points. But when you see that if they have any types of aggression, those would be more points. Again, they don't have to look like this, but the idea of having points that are varied really shows kids that, again, when you do something that's positive, you're going to earn some points. And then when you do something that is negative, you just lose points. It's simple as that. Again, you're not saying in a voice that's, you lost so many points. Again, it's already happened. So just kind of, it is what it is there. And then giving, again, the chance to earn back some of those points. And then they get to really feel proud about themselves for making some of those gains. And then they can use those points to even purchase these. Even in your own homes, you can set up some system like this. It doesn't have to look as intricate, but children can use this to purchase things at the dollar store, or even things that they can do. Um, in the home, you could have a little system where they can buy some of the candy that you were already going to give them. Again, they feel more accomplished in their behaviors, and it's a nice way to set this up. This is also an evidence-based practice for kids with ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, and this comes from the Summer Treatment Program manual. And that's also, some of that information is in our drive, and I can provide you with more information on this as well. Key concepts with punishers, again, they go more at that top of our triangle triangle. It shouldn't be the only thing in place. Again, we've already talked about reinforcement in our previous trainings. You should really have a lot of those working a majority of the time. Response cost is what I was talking about with the point system. So you're allowing children an opportunity to earn back some of the points they've already lost. And then it should be in a stepwise fashion. It shouldn't start from, again, maybe like I discussed, 1 minute, and then the next day the kid loses a whole day of something, or it has to be a stepwise fashion from the least to the most, because that's the way we can start to see better evidence. Again, you're documenting. That way we can go back, especially if a child has a behavior plan, and kind of figure out what's working, what's not working. And then always, always, always inform parents. Again, sometimes you might not think it's a big thing, but the kid might say it in a different way to the parent. So just always let them know, hey, this is what happened today. They lost 5 minutes of the recess time. So they're going to work on it and get better next time. That's the way I always like to couch it for parents, that they're learning from this experience and they're working hard for that next time. Most of you have heard of zero tolerance principles, that notion of once they do something, they're out. What the National Association of School Psychologists and many other organizations say is the evidence behind that practice, there's not much to back it up. And it actually is very punitive, and a lot of times it's implemented for kids from different backgrounds. So please really think through if your district's already doing something like that. I put some more evidence and more statements within our drive, but I just wanted to let you know that that way of working with children is not the best way to work with children at all. My favorite thing, especially working with younger kids, and this goes back to my training with infants and toddlers, is active ignoring, selective attention. So when I first learned this practice, I definitely wasn't the best at it, but you almost feel like you're a magician. If you've seen magic shows, you see that the magicians will use that sleight of hand or the distractions and get your direction focused over here or attention focused over here. Again, this works really well for minor disruptions. Okay, so you're allowing, I think, those redirections. Oh, sorry, I should say active ignoring. That you're removing your attention for just a little bit to be able to allow children to think through. they're not getting attention from you. So then they're saying to themselves like, wow, like that doesn't feel great. So I think for when you're working with kids, that's one thing you can have in your back pocket there. So it's again a way to, um, when they're following directions again, then you would give them, that you turn back on that amazing attention for the kids. So they see it's a bit of a difference. And you actually teach it to the children that this is what happens. And when you do something, I'm going to actually not look at that. And you might even want to work with other or praise the other children. So a couple ways to do these active ignoring is you're going to move yourself away. You are going to be subtle, so you're not going to scream out and loudly about it. I'm ignoring you now. It's just saying I'm going to ignore that behavior, and you may turn your body away and be consistent. So with these small behaviors that are disruptive or not aggressive, you're definitely always being consistent across each child with that. And then think about what are you going to ignore. So again, you have to have already planned these out. I like to also think about it as when you return your attention back to the students, again, you're giving them that idea of I'm doing something positive. So that's when I get the attention, because when the kids really like that from adult attention. And when you have an environment that's really engaging, the kids will see that, and you'll start to see more positive environment behaviors within that. But the absence, if you don't bring back your attention, and for kids who have a lot of mistaken behaviors, this can be really difficult. But think in your mind, if I don't return my attention when they're doing things that are positive, that is the definition of neglect. Okay, not in the sense that you're providing a bad environment, but again, it's not as engaging. It's again, you want to be proactive in catching them when they're performing good behaviors, right? So here's another way that this would look. So same scenario from before. Um, what you notice now is the teacher turns her back and has to focus on the other kiddos. And then the kid might continue to do that, but the teacher is consistent and not giving that attention. So hopefully the next time that behavior is what we would call extinguish. So it kind of will just go away, and the kid will just feel better about the other behaviors they're engaging. Now I want to just talk about a few concepts that are pretty powerful in my mind, especially the younger kids. This is something that is really useful. Even older kids, though, I think can learn a lot from this. And these are natural consequences. And one book that I went over last time I think is a good example of this, and also something to recommend to parents, is How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, and Listen So Kids Will Talk. And that's by Faber and Maislish. So the first example here is you tell a student to use their walking feet. The student falls and scrapes their knee because they didn't listen. They were running. However, you're going to offer empathy and address the safety concerns. So you get the kid a Band-Aid and say, you're being there for the kid. You're not adding, I told you that would happen. Again, the falling is already the consequence. They already might feel pretty bad. They're not feeling good. So again, that's already a natural consequence, right? Then another one is teacher prompted the student grab their coat, because they know that the student's always forgetting their coat. And the student forgets their coat on a mildly chilly day. So it's not freezing outside. And then the child is cold on the playground. So that consequence there is the child is feeling cold, and they may want to go get the jacket, but they can't because the teacher might not be able to leave. So they kind of have to be cold for a little bit. The thing with natural consequences is never use this for anything that could put a student in danger. For example, that first example here is if they're walking near the street. We would definitely never allow that natural consequence where we could put a child in danger. Always think about that. Talk through these examples with colleagues and think about how can we set up examples of these so we're all on the same page about what natural consequences look like. Then another term used is called logical consequences. So this one is often used for kids who might not be taking care of their materials. So their student might destroy the art supplies. And now for that, the student would have to do reparations or have to complete extra work chores or classroom chores to help pay for those damaged materials. Okay, so that's a logical consequence. They did something that destroyed something in the environment. Now they would have to replace that to help provide for others. The student might be running with scissors unsafely after you've already gone over the rules, and they would lose privileges for using scissors, and you might have to go back and reteach that concept for this kid. Student rolls their eyes at the teacher. That, you have that, it's a minor behavior. It doesn't feel good for teachers, but again, remembering the kid might just need that removal of deposit of that attention. And then when they do the behavior that they're giving a great facial feature or they're working with other peers, you're right back on it and showing that the kid that they're getting praise for good behaviors, right? Conflict resolution practices. So if a kid is being really mean to another student, then they have to think through and write an apology or even work with the student to do some of that conflict mediation for our kiddo. So now thinking about something that most of you have heard about before is timeout. And what does that look like? And why do we say timeout? Where did this concept come from? So timeout is actually the way it's conceptualized in many environments is timeout from positive adult attention. Okay, so for this to work, the environment has to be reinforcing for it to work. So it has to be all of those factors that we've already discussed in previous environments. There's a schedule, kids are having fun, there's good relationships. Because if you think about it, if a student is put in timeout and the environment isn't fun, what that becomes is actually the kid might enjoy timeout because it's not really fun being in this environment. So that's something to really think about. Always start from your environment. That first presentation that we did is going to be your base. A way to structure, sometimes when a child has to go to timeout, you definitely have already reviewed what behaviors the child is going to go to timeout for, but there's a statement that has to be pretty consistent for all of the people working with the student. So if this example here, they're already using a point system. So it says you lost 50 points for hitting Jimmy and you have a 20-minute timeout. If you behave appropriately for the first 10 minutes, you will earn 10 minutes off. Go sit under that tree right now. So they might be outside on the playground, and this kiddo, again, the way you're expressing it is not adding anything extra. It's just a neutral, matter-of-fact tone. They're already losing something, losing time off, but they can earn back time by showing that they can sit through the timeout correctly. So this may look a little bit overwhelming at first, but I think once you go through it and look here, I'll walk you through this because I think for me, when I first saw this, it was overwhelming. But this is a pretty common way to work with timeout cycles and thinking through when you're working in real life with kids, what's my next step? So you got to have a procedure, a protocol for this. So here's this first transition statement. In 5 minutes, you'll need to put away your materials. Then the command happens, the teacher sees that the student hasn't started doing that, so you say, please put away your materials. Then you would wait a certain amount of seconds. Again, remember their brains are developing, so you got to let them have some time to process that. If they comply, you praise. Remember, praise after compliance. Always praise that good behavior that you were expecting to see. However, the student might not do it. So then we go into this cycle here. They don't comply with the request. So what you would do, then you would use an if-then warning. However, if they do it at that point, then they comply, then you would praise. Okay, so we're giving them an extra chance. Maybe they just didn't hear you the first time. Maybe you're a little bit further away. So that's why our commands have to be effective and really think through and practice those commands. However, when they don't comply, what will happen is the kid will go into the timeout sequence there. And the kiddo will have to serve that timeout. They've already learned this. You've already practiced this with the kiddo. And so for them, once they get it done, and they come back, then you would have them actually comply with the command. So then they would put away that piece of paper and then you praise again. So it's just a matter of them finishing what they were maybe feeling that they didn't want to do, or if, whatever that function of the behavior was, you want to get them back to completing that. So here's another way to think of this. It's a script. You can model, however script you're going to use, but always have a protocol or a way to frame this. So when the kiddo is getting out of timeout, so you were sitting quietly on the chair, and then you would ask, why were you in the timeout? So then they give you the response. I didn't follow the directions to line up. So then you would say, are you ready to line up at the door? And the kid says, okay. So then you could say, also another way is just get them to get in that momentum of after they come out of the timeout, you might have them follow another command. So we're really reinforcing the idea that they're going to just kind of keep up with following the directions, and then they would go and line up, and then it's like nothing happened. Again, they've already served the timeout. That's already enough of the consequence. And so just moving forward and keep praising those positive behaviors after that's done. For all of these, whatever timeout procedure you and your team chooses to use, you must teach the procedure to the child. And they have to know the expectations and what's going to happen. It shouldn't be new to them at all. And so ways to do that with younger children is to use animals to show that the bear didn't follow through with the directions. Now they have to sit in a timeout for 3 minutes and sit quietly, and show them that sitting in timeout is not fun time, that when they finish with it, then they can come back and have a good time. And the space where they're at is always going to be removed. There's going to be things that are removed from it. So there wouldn't be toys by the timeout chair or the timeout area. It's a pretty understimulating environment, so it's not going to be fun for the kids. And we never would want to put a kid in a timeout for unsupervised or again, long periods of times. And then you're recording all of these. So either have a Google or an Excel sheet that you're using to record these, or even a timeout binder that you're kind of carrying with you throughout the day, because timeouts can happen in other places than just the classroom. Again, never seclude a child from food or restroom breaks. I'm going to say that again. Never seclude or pull a child away from food or restroom breaks. That is not legal. It's unethical to do that, and a child must always be supervised. Okay, so again, you can suspend a timeout and say when you're done eating, then you will have to finish the remainder of your timeout. Okay. Another way timeout can look, and this is more a proactive strategy, and the one here on the left comes from Conscious Discipline. And one thing I really enjoy for working with younger kids and even kids with a lot of sensory issues is to have a system set up where students can kind of release, get out some of that anger or the frustrations. It's a way to channel, stomp it out, push the wall, flex it, or even counting, some yoga relaxation strategies. For older kiddos, this can definitely look like a calm, soothing space. There might be music that they can listen to, or even just lower lighting in that area. So if you're teaching kids how to regulate, again, remember you're setting them up for future successes in their life. I want to share a quote with you. We're about almost done with our presentation today. I want to say, when I heard this quote, it really made a lot of sense to me. Even working as an adult and with other adults in our settings, we are not thinking machines that feel. Rather, we are feeling machines that think. We always have emotions and feelings going on inside of us. And for younger kids, they're still learning how to do that. So always have that in your back of your mind. This child is learning how to be a better feeling machine, and you're there teaching them that. So global steps to follow when we do any of these practices. Again, what I discussed earlier is going from a least kind of restrictive way of disciplining to a more kind of restrictive way, right? And so you would, again, follow these steps here. Again, always choose the lowest one first. Again, we've got to work for this way. It's going to have better data to collect along the way as well. Another way I saw this was from one at school who actually implemented their own examples in each of these steps. And I think that's a way you can modify and have this, because it's also going to make it easier to share with families and talk to families about, this is what it looks like in my classroom or even my therapy sessions. This is what I would use. So people know the expectations, and you can even review this with students periodically. Also, a visual that I thought was pretty helpful from Vanderbilt's University was this kind of, it's set up in different colors here. Same idea, you're going from a least restrictive to a more restrictive form, but always, thinking, what can I do that's not going to be as big of a consequence first. So think through these things and brainstorm as well. Then this one comes from conscious discipline, and it's thinking of traditional ways, a lot of the things that we may have already discussed. Um, Conscious discipline is having these reminder cards that you're letting the child choose a more helpful way of with their behavior. So I think that's a nice way to frame it for younger kids, even older kids. So you're allowing them to make that choice. Then, if they don't choose to do that, you can give the second, allow them a safe place, or that second warning in that traditional format. Often in the traditional, the next step would be that loss of privilege, right? But this one might be, you're kind of reviewing back to that behavior plan and trying to help the kid problem solve and be right there with them. The last one for conscious discipline is, the logical consequences that we've already discussed, that there might be extra things that they have to do, or reparations or conflict resolution practices. Okay. Some downsides with punishment practices, also what research has shown a lot is that attitude and perceptions for kids, it can happen for kids in the school setting or teachers. They get a bad feeling toward teachers, that environment. Again, we don't want to make that environment poor for the kiddos. We want to make it a better environment. And then it can be punitive in a sense that, it doesn't feel good. Think back when we might have been punished as a child, or even if we get a ticket, those things don't feel good in the moment. And then we want to stick to that ratio, more positives to negatives. Okay, those more positive or the reinforcing practices to punishment practices. So I think kids who have more behavioral problems are going to definitely need more. It could even look like a 12-to-1 ratio. So definitely think through, how's that looking for my kiddo, and work from that base of the pyramid. So you're setting a great relationship for kids, you're modeling all these things, and it's very helpful for them. Now we're going to go through crisis prevention and intervention. And thinking through this, I have to first tell you a little bit about the brain. And I know this is not a biology course, but anytime I work with kids who are having a crisis, or thinking about, I'm always thinking about what's going on in the brain, and how are they being affected by that? Because that's a big component to this, and we need to learn this as well. So from conscious discipline, they offer these charts that I've seen during trainings as well with parents, that are really helpful for them to realize the different parts of our brains and what they're doing. So if you all touch here in the front of your brain, we have something called our executive functioning lobe, or a prefrontal lobe. And that's where our executive functionings really happen. So our ability to control our emotions, our ability to think through problems, algebra, relationships, all those things happen here in the front part of our brain. Okay, so we always use this. This is how we engage with people. It's on. But what happens is, when we become upset, something else kicks in. This is called our limbic system, and it's where our emotions are processed. And that's in the middle of our brain. And so that's a feeling of maybe your fight or flight. I need to get out of the room. I'm scared. I'm going to hit. I'm going to be aggressive. A lot of these things come from here. And then the next state might be a survival state, where completely devoid of, it's no thought, no emotion. It's kind of just acting. And that's called the brainstem. So that brainstem is in charge of a lot of our basic functionings. And so this might be a place where things are really increase to a level that's pretty dangerous for the child or even people around the child. One way to explain this, and I've used this countless times to families for children. In my work in counseling, I use this all the time, and please really do use this. Dr. Siegel's hand model of the brain is something I really like. So what we already reviewed was those pictures. And if everyone can put their hands up, you would have here, the wrist would be the brain stem. Then you would pull in your thumb, and that middle part is going to be the limbic system where all those emotions are being processed, okay? Then when you wrap your fingers around your thumb, that becomes your executive functionings, that, remember, that thinking part of our brain. However, when we're calm and safe and we're doing good, this part is on. So we're using our brains, we're thinking good, but something happens in our environment, and that something makes us use less of that front part of our brain, and that flips up. The lid becomes flipped. You flipped your lid. And now who's in charge? The middle part of the brain. So it's that limbic system that's in charge. So really working with kids, I've used this as a nonverbal cue. So the lid's flipped, the kid sees it, and they know that, oh, I have to practice my strategy and put my lid back on. And then you might even give that as a signal when they do that in a thumbs up. So I really like this model. I put this handout also in our Google Drive. Feel free to use it, and I use it all the time. I really think it's a good visual for people to know about the brain. Now moving into crisis situations. So the first part of that is when things are calm. This is just business as usual. Kids working well. Keep using that in reinforcing environment. We're here at the start, number one, calm. We haven't got on the ride yet. Phase two, though, a trigger. When we think about triggers, they can be people, places, or things that affect your emotions or behaviors, and they make them go in a way that could be outward or inward for kiddos. So when you start to see this phase, you can prompt some of the strategies. Like I said, when you see the lid starts to flip, you're going to, prompt the calm down corner. And these things have already been practiced. Remember, you've already taught the social emotional skills. So kiddo's going to learn how to use those. Then agitation, things are starting to ramp up. You see the kid's body language is looking more fidgety. There's increased activity. So you can start to see they're not sitting in their area or even pulling away and disengaging from the group. So you know the signs, you know the difference between calm and what does my kiddo look like when they have become agitated in the past, because you've collected the data on that. Then you may intervene by, again, you're going to prompt some of these strategies, but you're also watching your own body language. You might lower your voice a little. You might remove a lot of eye contact, okay? So you're allowing the child some space. You're kind of meeting their energy with lower energy. Okay? Then accelerating phase, that the kid might become more argumentative, or even, I'm not doing that, opposition, or even engaging in property destruction. So at this point, again, you would be a quick redirection, not many words, and try to reinforce any kind of on-task behavior and redirect that behavior as best as you can. Now, when it becomes to a peak phase, things are escalated to a point where there might be verbal and physical aggression, and the lid has become flipped. And there may even be working from a lower level than that. So at this point, this is where you worked with your colleagues and to develop a plan to keep yourself and others safe, and that you've even practiced this plan, okay? Because this is the most important thing, is to practice this. So I can tell you about this, but you have to sit there with practice and role play, and even do this with somebody who's trained and certified in person to really talk more through crisis management. But if you don't already know your plan within a school setting or have a plan, you really need to do this. It's your obligation as a professional as well. Now, when the crisis is over, and I've been in these situations where, because I've had to do physical intervention or restraint with children, the energy across the board is just lowered. You're exhausted, the child's exhausted. In that moment when there's that decreased energy, it's probably not the best time to talk about what's happened, but you're just modeling the breathing. It's also helping you regulate your breathing, and that child sees that, and again, it creates a calmer environment. Following a little bit of that de-escalation period, you want to debrief about what happened, and again, you're doing it in a calm way. You're saying that was really tough for you, and talk through this, what happened and what is the consequence for that behavior. Again, because if you don't put in the consequence, or you don't talk through it, the child might learn inadvertently that they can do that and they got away with the behavior. So again, we want to work with the child to do better the next time. It's always a place of learning. We can do better the next time. Now, some trainings that I've done in the past, but these aren't the only ones, and your district might use different kinds, or your state might use different kinds. Crisis Prevention Institute training, Nonviolent Crisis Prevention Institute, or PROACT is one. I also put in our Google Drive a handout that talks about the research behind a lot of the programs, or even the frequency of completing one of these types of trainings. And then also consulting with your professional agencies is really important. What do they have available? What are they saying about practices like these? I also found this amazing summary of all states, the regulations and statutes regarding physical intervention or even seclusion practices. Okay, so go on there. This is part of educating ourselves and thinking through and being knowledgeable about these things before we do them. Okay, so I wanted to end here on a quote, and one that I think I use every day is that, try to be better at this, is at the end of the day, the only questions I will ask myself are, did I love enough? Did I laugh enough? Did I make a difference? And so I think that's what you all are doing out there, is really making a difference in the lives of children and families. So I appreciate you being here and watching this today. So right now, if anyone has any questions, you can put them into the chat, or if anybody wanted to unmute themselves. I see we have Lee and Shadra here, and whoever else is, I don't see anyone else. Kim, do you have any questions?
No, I'm good. I love the quote at the end. Good. I will be posting that quote. I can promise you that. No, this is great. Thank you.
Good. Well, I wanted to, thank you and Therapy Travelers for thinking about this, and I'm glad that these are going to be living videos that can be used in additional trainings, and a lot of great resources came out of this for others. I'm kind of putting them all together.
Yes.
So. All right.
No, that's great. And just so everybody knows, the videos are available on our website under remote resources, and you click on webinar. So you'll see them there. And then all of these documents for internal Therapy Travelers employees will be available on our community portal. But if you do want to receive these and you haven't yet got the permission to be granted the access and you're not part of Therapy Travelers, send me an email and we'll make sure you have access to get these files. That's it.
All right. Well, I just want to say I had a lot of fun doing this, and I look forward to talking with some people. I'm going to make sure to also send my email with that. And if people want to email me direct questions, I'm okay with that as well. So.
Oh, that's great.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to log off now. Have a good rest of your week.
Sounds good. Thank you. All righty. Have a good one, guys.
Okay. Bye.
Yeah. So no, I just wanted to say thank you, Dr. Armendariz. I know this is number 4. It's part 4 of the behavioral training series. So that's a collection of tools. So no, that's all I wanted to say, and you're on.
All right. We're recording now. So, like I said, this has been a really great experience for me, putting all of these resources together. And given my training in this area, a lot of it is relevant to the experiences I've had. And I really want others to learn from this and continue to grow as a team. So right now I'm going to go ahead and share the slides. And while I'm doing that, please enter, for those of you who are joining us, well, I guess I'll put that into the chat too. So put your position in the chat here. I just want to have an idea of who's here. Okay. And share the screen here. Okay. So there we go. All right, so today we are going to be reviewing punishment practices, timeout. What does that mean, timeouts, right? A lot of times that word gets thrown around. Crisis prevention and intervention, so something that is pretty difficult to deal with, but when we have the appropriate training and we work together as a team, I think we can really make that as least stressful as possible. So right now, thinking when we talk about punishment, something that's brought up a lot in my training and working within schools, especially have had training in other states, is to remember that there are still some states that allow for corporal punishment. And when we look at our best practices, especially within school psychology, and I know for many other organizations that that's just something that's not within our ethical guidelines. We know it's not best practice, but just to be aware that this is still going on. It's still kind of a philosophy that some people might be working from, especially if they come from other states. Again, we want to work toward training and educating others to work from a more positive way of discipline. Okay. So today we're going to review punishment practices, and not all punishment is, like I said, you're thinking of that corporal punishment where it's a spanking. That's not how we think of it, and we'll go through that right now. We'll look at some not natural and logical consequences and extinction. What does that look like? And then I'm going to go through what is timeout from, what does that mean? And then we'll talk about crisis prevention and intervention, and then go through some questions and discussion. So if you were with us, or if you go back to some of the previous presentations, I believe it was our first presentation for this series, you'll remember the pyramid. And when we work with children, and this goes for if you're testing, if you're doing your therapy, you're working down here from this bottom of the base of the pyramid. Okay, so you're using a lot of good coaching techniques, just like you would if you were coaching a team, any sports team. You're encouraging, you're praising, and you offer some incentives, okay? That's helpful for kids. And incentives could also be, celebrating. You're giving a little certificate. You completed 10 sessions of speech language therapy or 10 sessions of occupational therapy. So it's just a nice way to celebrate their work. As you go up to the top of the pyramid, you start to see some of those consequences, the reminders of the expected behavior. They get less frequent. Going up toward the top is when you want to start to use a little bit less of these, especially at the very top. It says use selectively. So your loss of privilege, removing things, timeout, having to call parents about, oftentimes when I work with parents, they're like, oh no, what happened when you give them a call? So it's nice to be able to call a lot of times about things that are positive, those celebrations. So working from the bottom of the pyramid. And what tends to happen is if we work more from that top of the pyramid, our base becomes very shaky and everything's thrown off. And more kids than not are going to have difficulty responding. So we definitely have to think about how can we work from that solid base for children and flip that back around. Here's another way to look at this. And I found this doing some research for this presentation, and I really like the way that they have those plugged in. So they were able to make it their own and put in some different areas, some examples. And you can do this too, just create that. You can find this template online, and it's also in our Google Drive. But definitely write some examples, reminders of what you're doing throughout the day. How does your environment work with these? Again, you're going to get more effective outcomes by doing this. Again, there are going to be outliers. Some kids are going to have struggle with this, especially children who are ADHD, who are diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder or even other emotional disorders. It's going to be a struggle, but more often than not, working from this way is going to be more positive and have better outcomes. So right now we're going to take a little bit of a deep deep dive into what punishment means. This is something you may have learned in your general psychology course. And so last time we reviewed a little bit about reinforcement. So anything that you're doing, you're after the behavior, it's going to increase the behavior. If you add it or subtract it, would be reinforcing. So reinforcing is always about increasing behavior. Whether you added something or took it away, that's what that means by positive or negative. Then for punishment, that's again, always the concept is decreasing behavior. So did you add something to decrease the behavior? Or did you take something away that is decreasing the behavior? And so now I want to go through this video here. You'll have this through the slides, but right now I thought this was a pretty good example.
Who has fallen asleep during class. As a consequence, the teacher may get upset and verbally scold the student to wake him up. The misbehavior of sleeping would then stop and the student would start to focus on classwork again. In this instance, a stimulus was being presented, the verbal scolding, in order for the misbehavior to decrease. So we would call this positive punishment. In our last example, we have a student who is using their cell phone during class. As a consequence for this misbehavior, the teacher could go over to the student's desk and confiscate the cell phone. The student's misbehavior would decrease and they could focus on their work again. So, due to a stimulus being removed, the misbehavior decreased, which would be negative punishment. And those are the basic types.
So most of you have had a speeding ticket, right? And that's a form of a positive punishment. It doesn't sound positive, right? It has nothing to do with the quality or the affect of it. It's something's being added to hopefully decrease the behavior. What happens more often than not is a lot of people will only decrease that speeding behavior when they're in that same place that they got the ticket. So they kind of start to realize, that's where the cop is, or that patrol is going to be. So it doesn't generalize as well as other reinforcement practices that we've already gone through in previous presentations. Also, that practice of removal of items, what I want to think about with that is if you remove too much, sometimes kids have nothing to work with. So let's go over some examples first of positive punishment. So we have the verbal reprimands. So being able, having somewhat of a critique. So, hey, you got to keep your eyes over here, or keep looking back this way. We've all had that experience with teachers in our past. The one that you should really work on with the mirror, and this one I often use, especially with younger kids, is the nonverbal glance. So you don't have to use any words, and you're communicating a lot with that glance of, So you're just kind of like letting them know that, giving them a prompt in their mind, depending on their developmental level and functional level, that maybe they got to think through that behavior and change up a little bit. The thing is, when I was going through all of these, a lot of times, even on a Google search of the images, a lot of times the adults with the finger in the kid's face and they're pointing at them, or you see this picture here, the woman screaming, and then the arms are right here on the sides. A lot of times that's adding extra things to that punishment. You're already letting them know that you're critiquing the behavior, but by doing that, you're almost adding another piece, which another teacher might not do. So again, you're making it more difficult often for kids' behavior to really generalize across settings. And we don't really want kids to have a really bad experience in an environment where they're learning. We want it to be, again, working from that base. It's really engaging. You have a schedule kids are following and they're able to keep up with it. So again, calm down a little bit with, feeling, check yourself and have other colleagues check in with you to be able to say, hey, that when you let the kid know that they needed to keep their feet on the floor, it sounded a little bit rough. Having those those conversations with colleagues is pretty important as well, and with our own supervisors. So the verbal reprimands, we're keeping a neutral tone. You got your face isn't adding a lot of extras to it. You really have that poker face. So you kind of just let that message of what you're reminding the kiddo to do just be the message that it's clear. And you're using specifics and positively worded directives. So the one that comes to mind often is keep your feet on the floor, keep walking on the sidewalk, stay on the sidewalk. And again, it's not in the form of a question, you're reminding, and essentially that reminder also becomes a command. So what is very critical to think about is if you do one of these verbal reprimands, you have to be ready to follow through with that. Because if the kid doesn't follow through, and we'll talk about that as well today, it becomes you have to follow through with the consequence. Okay, so either they followed through and did it, you praise that behavior, or then you might have to go into the timeout sequence or removal or the consequence for the student. So with positive punishment, you also might be adding extra chores, detention. And with all of these, you really want to document. And if you notice kids,